Hello NFL fans and welcome back to the Wall of NFL channel. You all just missed a hysterical event that my wife did. She tried to she went live while I was going to the toilet, and she tried to introduce me like a boxing announcer, and the mic was off, and you couldn't see her, so that saved some embarrassment for her. And maybe for myself too. But welcome back, everyone. So we're going to talk about my top fantasy draft picks at every position. And we are going to, every position. We won't talk about kickers an awful lot, don't worry. But first and foremost, I wanted to say that if you wanted to play in a fantasy league with me, we've got a Wall of NFL fantasy league, and anyone can join. The details of how to join are in the description currently, or you can just comment on the video and then I can help you through it as well. Whatever like that. So, with all that being said, I hope you fantasy NFL fans are excited, because I certainly am. And we're going to start off with the quarterbacks. I think that's the most appropriate. So the best quarterback I think you should draft is definitely Josh Allen. Josh Allen has been in the league for 4 years now, I think it is. He signed a huge contract after last season. Not after the 2021 season, but after the 2020 season, his breakout year. And he's not looked back, and nor have the Bills. They've been absolutely brilliant. He has averaged in 2021, he averaged 24 points a week. So if you had him on your team, you were set, and you were definitely making the playoffs pretty much. And he was brilliant. And the most important thing that makes him number one was his ability to run the ball. So he had 764 rushing yards, I think it was, and 6 or 7 touchdowns as well. And he scored 112 points on the ground out of around 400 points. Which is an awful lot. So he gets so many points from throwing it, over 300 fantasy points a year, but also over 100 rushing, and that is the icing on the cake, which puts him at number one, because you do get more points from rushing the ball than you do from passing it, because it's 25 yards for a point, 25 yards passing for 1 point in fantasy, and 10 yards rushing for 1 point in fantasy. So you definitely want your quarterback to be a mobile one. And but speaking of quarterbacks, I mean, he is mobile, but he's not really known for his running. So at my number 2 spot is Justin Herbert. He's one of my favorite quarterbacks in the league. He has a tremendous arm. He's a great leader, and any team would be blessed to have him on their team. He came into the NFL it's quite a surprising one against the Chiefs, when Tyrod Taylor punctured his lung right before kickoff. So it was quite a surprise start for the Chargers back in 2020. But now in 2021, he carried the Chargers on his back every single game and never let them out of playoff contention. And I mean, without Justin Herbert, there was no way they were getting anywhere near the playoffs. And he really helped Brandon Staley, their rookie head coach, to actually begin to compete. And that is all thanks to Justin Herbert. The defense was terrible, and so he had to throw an awful lot. And whilst their defense this year is going to be a lot better, so maybe they'll be in a little bit less like shootouts, but I think that his maturity and the team, and he and Brandon Staley, that extra year of experience, he's going to be really good and actually decrease the amount of interceptions that he threw last year. So he threw 15 interceptions in 2021, and I think that number's definitely going to go down, which means his points might rise as well. I also think he'll be the leader in the passing yards category, which definitely is going to mean he's going to have tons of points. So I think Justin Herbert is going to be the guy that I draft if Josh Allen's off the board. I think he'll probably go maybe 3rd round. So if you're in the 3rd round and he's there, I reckon snap him up. Number 3, I mean, how could he not be in the top 3? Patrick Mahomes. He's mobile, similar to Justin Herbert, but maybe uses his legs a little bit more than Herbert. But since he's entered the league, he's been the best quarterback and is still arguably the best quarterback in the NFL. Josh Allen is definitely the quarterback that you're arguing Mahomes being number one with. But Mahomes, his arm talent's amazing. And whilst that he has lost his best receiver, Tyreek Hill, and a man he relied on very heavily in the passing game, he's still got Andy Reid, his head coach, Hall of Fame tight end Travis Kelce, and he's got a bunch of second receivers. And I'm sure he'll find a lot of players to pass to, and the Chiefs' offense will be brilliant once again. Missing Tyreek Hill, but I'm sure that they'll work it out in the end. So, moving on to number 4, Kyler Murray, the hardest quarterback to tackle in the NFL, and I think there's not really any question about that because he's so low. His low center of gravity is 5'9", which is unheard of as a quarterback. He's so hard to tackle because the way he moves compared to a 6'4", 250-pound defensive end is insane. So when he takes a cut, no defender's going to keep up with him. So he's able to break up the field and really and get a lot of yards. So last year he had over 500 yards on the ground, or would have got 500 yards on the ground had he not gone injured for a few weeks in the middle of the season. And I think if he's able to kind of limit the amount of drop-off that he has later on in the season, he's going to have a really successful year. Kyler Murray, the last 3 seasons, he's been really good. Well, in fact, unbelievable in the first half of the season. But after Thanksgiving or around then, he definitely drops off, and the rest of the Cardinals do the same. Maybe that's to do with Cliff Kingsbury, but I think Kyler Murray is definitely someone you should have on your team as your starting quarterback because of that running ability. And also, he was one of the most accurate quarterbacks last year. So it's not that his legs is what gets him all the points. He's a brilliant passer as well. Up until he got injured, he was over 70% completion percentage, maybe over 75%. I don't remember exactly how much, but I know for a fact he was number one up and throughout that first half of the season. So he's definitely someone you should have on your list. So this next one, it might be a bit of a rough. It's a bit of a reach to put him in the number 5 slot, but I think he's definitely someone you should watch out for. And whilst he's not one of the best in the NFL at passing, it's his running ability that puts him in this top 5. Jalen Hurts was really good in fantasy last year. In the first 7-8 weeks of the season, he had over 20 points every single week. He had the best running stats of the year. He had over 700 yards rushing. In fact, he led the league in rushing with 784 yards, and he had 10 touchdowns as well, more than any other quarterback. And, that gets you a lot of fantasy points. So that's 10 times 6, 60 plus, that's about 140 fantasy points. And that is what you really want in your player at quarterback, because as well, his passing is going to get a lot better this year. He has had another year under his belt, and he will inevitably get better as a passer. And not to mention his weapons now, he has A.J. Brown, one of the best wide receivers in the league. And they traded one of their first-round picks to get him this year during the 2022 draft. So with that addition, I think there's going to be a marked improvement in his passing. And I think that only means he's going to get much better in fantasy. So whilst he'll be competing with Tom Brady, Matthew Stafford for that 5th best quarterback in fantasy spot, I really think that his running is going to make a difference. Because when he gets into the red zone, defensive coordinators have a lot to think about, because if he goes and runs with it, all of his players are tied up defending a potential pass, or, he's got a lot of space to run around in the red zone. So I think that he's going to be one that you should definitely have on your fantasy team. Of course, this is all of these picks are based on whether they'll get injured or not. And I'm hoping that none of these guys get injured. And that, I think if they don't get injured, they will be in these top 5s, because Kyler Murray, I think, wouldn't have missed out on that top 5 last year if he had not gotten injured, because maybe he would have been stayed his usual brilliant self for longer into the season. But injuries happen. It's the NFL. So now we're going to move on to running backs. And this guy is a little bit forgotten, I feel like, because when I go and look at the NFL.com's rankings for look, projections. When I go and look at NFL.com's fantasy projections for this year, this guy is nowhere near the top. And it really surprises me because Derrick Henry is a phenomenal running back. Last year, he spent a lot of the time injured with a foot injury. And that was terrible. And the Titans did not look the same at all. But he was on track for over 2,000 yards last year had he not gotten injured. And he also was on track for over 20 touchdowns as well. That would have been maybe more fantasy points than Cooper Kupp, who had, I think, around 450 in the end. And this guy, the year before, had over 2,000 yards and was the highest scoring fantasy player. And I think that this guy, if he stays healthy, he's an absolute beast. And there's no way that he's not going to be at the number one if he stays healthy. And he's not really a guy that gets injured an awful lot. He did last year, but I think that's just one-off injury. It's not like some other players that we'll come on to in this running back list. Jonathan Taylor last year was in the running, pardon the pun, for the MVP. Not many running backs have a chance of being in the running for the MVP, but this guy was. He had almost 2,000 yards. He had over 1,900 in the end, and had 20. He had 20 touchdowns and 2,100 all-purpose yards, so running and passing. So he was brilliant. I mean, so that's 120 points in touchdowns, and that's 210 points in yards. He's got to be one of the top running backs off this list. And you've got to remember, running backs are the biggest commodity, most valuable commodity you can have in fantasy, because there's not that many running backs who are going to get you 20 points every week. But this guy, Jonathan Taylor, and of course Derrick Henry, and some of the other guys on this running backs list will get you 20 points a week on average. And I think you can't pass that up in fantasy. And that's why all of these guys go in the first round. So Jonathan Taylor, he might have a bit of a lesser part in the offense this year because Matt Ryan's coming in, and Matt Ryan's going to be trusted a whole lot more than Carson Wentz was last year. Carson Wentz was not trusted by Frank Reich and, of course, the owner Jim Irsay, and it's just ended up in him getting traded to the Washington Commanders. So I think that with Matt Ryan in the team, they will have a bit of more of a passing game going on, but that might also mean that he catches a lot of passes as well. Although saying that, Nyheim Hines is probably their pass-catching option out of the backfield. So Jonathan Taylor might have a little bit of a drop-off from last year, but even if he has a little bit of a drop-off, he still could be the highest-scoring running back next year, or this season coming up. So, on to my next one, Austin Ekeler. He was an absolute beast last year. He's not very tall, but he's very agile, and he's talked about as being the pound-for-pound strongest athlete or best athlete in the NFL. He's quick and agile, catches passes really well, and the weird thing is he had less than 1,000 yards rushing last year, but was second actually by quite a long way. There was about 40 points between him and who was in third place in the 2021 scoring. So Austin Ekeler only had about 900 yards, but his pass catching out of the backfield was so crucial to how he did. Of course, you get a point per reception, and with those yards as well, and all the touchdowns that he scored, receiving and running, he was absolutely brilliant. And in that pass-happy offense, Eckler's going to get a lot of the ball because he'll get every single rush because there's absolutely no competition at the running back position for him. And he catches a lot of passes as well because Justin Herbert, he didn't have an awful lot of time, and his offensive line has got a lot to work on if they're going to be able to protect Justin Herbert properly. But that means if Justin Herbert's under a lot of pressure, he'll dump the ball off to Ekeler, and this guy will get catches, he'll get yards, and he'll get touchdowns, and he'll get you fantasy points. So Aaron Jones, I think I would put him maybe up there with Jonathan Taylor or Derrick Henry had he not have to compete with A.J. Dillon. A.J. Dillon is the other running back that he's got to compete against at the Packers, and he gets all the red zone targets or the red zone touches. A.J. Dillon is a bit of a stronger and bigger running back, and that's why I think that he'll get more of the red zone touches, and he got the red zone touches when it came to the biggest moments in the playoffs in 2020. Well, I guess 2021 season, but the playoffs were in 2022. But Aaron Jones, now that he hasn't got to compete with catches against the likes of Davante Adams, he's going to get the ball an awful lot because Aaron Rodgers didn't trust many other receivers other than his running back Aaron Jones and the most talented receiver in the NFL, Davante Adams. So I think he's going to get a lot of catches, a lot of yards this year, but maybe less touchdowns because A.J. Dillon might be the workhorse in the red zone. Moving on to Christian McCaffrey, and I've kind of thrown him in here because I'm not really sure where to put him. He certainly is worth drafting and possibly could be the highest scoring running back if he stays healthy. But he doesn't stay healthy. In the past 2 seasons, out of 33 games, he's played 10. That's less than a third, and I don't think that's good enough. And you just can't really play a guy who's not on the field. The last 2 seasons, I've drafted him with my first pick, and it has not gone well. Well, not in every league, but in some of my leagues, I've drafted him number 1 overall, and yeah, I have regretted it every time. So for me, he's undraftable. No matter where I'm drafting, he is not going to be my pick. Just because you cannot trust him to be on the field. When he was on the field, though, he was averaging over 20 points, just like I think Derrick Henry and Jonathan Taylor will do this year. So he's certainly someone that you should draft if you know he's going to be healthy, but we just don't know. So I think you can't really draft him. He's one of the few players that are just undraftable, I think. But as I said, if he's on the field, he's going to get a ton of points. So maybe he's worth the risk when it gets to 2nd, 3rd round. But to be honest, I can guarantee that someone will risk it in round 1 or 2 because of the amount of talent that he has. Also, I might add, without a doubt, every single year, McCaffrey is the highest projected running back scorer by NFL.com. And surely at this point, they should start predicting that he's only going to play 10 games because, I mean, that's generous as well, predicting him to play 10 games. So it's a bit of a risky one. But there you go. Draft Christian McCaffrey if you want a high-scoring running back that doesn't really get you on the field. I mean, and also, he plays the start of the season and not the end, and the end is the most important. So moving on to wide receivers, and I don't think you can start any conversation about wide receivers without mentioning this guy. Well, you can not mention if you're talking about dodgy receivers who you don't want on your team. But Cooper Kupp won the Super Bowl MVP last year. He had the most amount of receptions in the NFL, most amount of yards, receiving yards, and most amount of receiving touchdowns. He did every single. He led in every category, and he had the best season any wide receiver could have. I definitely think there's going to be a bit of a drop-off because teams will start to learn how to defend against him, and that's kind of what happens when a team wins the Super Bowl. Other teams copy them, other teams watch tape, and he's not going to be as good as he was last year. That's kind of just a fact, and it's unlikely for him to have another season in a row where he's the best, another best season of all time for any receiver. So I just think it's unlikely that he'll do the same. However, even if he doesn't do the same, he could still be the best scoring running wide receiver in the NFL because, I mean, with Matthew Stafford, their chemistry looked unrivaled. I mean, the next guy might have maybe better chemistry, but Cooper Kupp has shown that with Matthew Stafford and an elite quarterback at the helm of the offense with Sean McVay, he's going to score tons and tons and tons of fantasy points for you. So he should definitely be picked in round 1. However, I am worried a little bit that there might be a second season slump by, well, not just Cooper Kupp, but by the whole Rams team. So something to keep in mind, but I would still pick him as the number 1 receiver in your NFL draft. Next up, I already mentioned the chemistry with this guy, Davante Adams, and his quarterback, Derek Carr. I think Derek Carr could be one of the leaders in passing this year, and he's definitely going to have Adams to thank for that. Davante Adams is, I think, the best receiver in the NFL in terms of talent, in terms of, pretty much in terms of talent. I think that if he and Cooper Kupp would have switched teams last year, it would have been the same story for Davante Adams. He'd have had possibly the best season of any receiver ever. I think that you cannot count him out in any situation. Double, triple covered, he can still come up with the ball. And not only that, but he has Darren Waller as well, the tight end. And he's going to garner a lot of attention. So maybe there'll be a little bit more space for Davante Adams to catch more passes. Derek Carr and Davante Adams were teammates in college. And Davante Adams' favorite quarterback ever to play with was Derek Carr. And Derek Carr said the best wide receiver he has ever had is Davante Adams. And those two guys are going to have a great year together. And there's no doubt about that. I really think that there's going to be a lot of success in store for these two. And finally, Derek Carr has a competent receiver. I mean, I know Hunter Renfrow is fantastic, always gets you a first down no matter what. But Adams can take the top off the defense. He can make huge plays. And anytime you're in a bit of a jam, you throw it up. Adams is the guy to catch it there for you. So moving on to Deebo Samuel, and I think he's a little bit of a tricky one. So he gets my number 3 slot because he's a kind of running back / wide receiver for the 49ers. He does so much work for them. And I don't think he's going to have that many yards and catches and touchdowns as a receiver, but maybe more so as a running back this year. Trey Lance is going to be his quarterback this year, with Jimmy Garoppolo going. He's definitely going to move on, I think. And Deebo Samuel is going to be the guy, potentially at running back and wide receiver. And Trey Lance he didn't show an awful lot of success throwing the ball. So they're going to be quite a ground-heavy offense. And Deebo Samuel's going to play a big part in that. And the fact that he can he'll be the number 1 receiver and possibly the number 1 running back as well. He's going to get more touches than possibly any other player in the NFL that isn't a quarterback or a center. So he's certainly worth drafting. The only worry with it is that teams will find the 49ers offense very predictable at running the ball. And that maybe Deebo Samuel as well doesn't want to be a running back because they had a bit of an off-season argument. I think the 49ers... I think Deebo Samuel wanted a new contract. Deebo Samuel wanted to leave. Sorry, I'm mixing myself up. Deebo Samuel wanted to leave or get a new contract. The 49ers wanted to sign him, but it wasn't really working out because Deebo Samuel didn't want to play as a running back anymore, or he wanted more money. It wasn't really decided what it was he wanted. It was kept very close to the chest. But I do think that maybe there's a little bit of animosity between the two parties, between Deebo Samuel and the 49ers. So maybe it might not work out as him being... maybe he won't get the touches that I'm predicting after all. Sorry, I haven't given the most eloquent explanation of why I think Deebo Samuel's number 3, but essentially it's because he's going to get loads of touches at wide receiver and running back, and the only worry is Deebo Samuel might not want to be a running back, so there might be a little bit of tension between the two parties. And moving on to Justin Jefferson. Justin Jefferson this week came out and said that he wants to be, by the end of the season, talked about as the best wide receiver in the NFL. He's got a long way to go though, because Kupp and Davante Adams, he's got Deebo Samuel, and there's actually like Jamar Chase. He's going to get better, and I think there's going to be a lot of competition for that best receiver in the NFL title. There's Tyreek Hill as well, and I think he's only out of the conversation because no one really trusts Tua, his quarterback. And I think that Justin Jefferson, he could definitely be talked about that way, but I think it might come down to the limitations of Kirk Cousins. I mean, Davante Adams has Derek Carr, Cooper Kupp has Matthew Stafford, and Kirk Cousins is not quite the same level as those two guys. He's not an elite quarterback like the other two are, and that might be where Justin Jefferson suffers. They've also got Adam Thielen, and he's going to take catches away from Justin Jefferson as well. But he's a young guy, and over the next 5 years, he will certainly be talked about as one of the best, if not the best. I think he's a top 5 receiver in the NFL, and he is just held back by, an offense last year that was focused on the ground game with Dalvin Cook, and Kirk Cousins, who's not the best passer of the ball. I also want to mention, if Dalvin Cook for the Vikings. He's a running back. He's another excellent choice. I think I forgot him off my list when I was making it yesterday. I think Dalvin Cook would go in 5th ahead of McCaffrey. But I did want to mention McCaffrey because if he does stay healthy, he's going to be a good one. Anyway, back to the wide receivers. And I think it's time to talk about Jamar Chase. He lit the NFL on fire last year. He was so entertaining to watch. There's plays stuck in my mind against the Ravens where he catches just a slant, a 5-yard slant, and bounces off Ravens wide receivers, speeds past them all, jumps over a couple. Well, not all of that, but he did an amazing job at getting through all of them. And he's almost untackleable. He's so fast, so hard to catch, and he can turn any play into a touchdown. If you want to see how good Jamar Chase is, just search up in YouTube Jamar Chase versus the Ravens. He has highlights for days against just the Ravens, let alone the rest of the teams in the NFL. Jamar Chase, with a season under his belt now, is going to get even better. He and Joe Burrow have a really great partnership that has come from LSU in college and is clearly one of the combos to watch in the NFL this year. And I can't imagine how much better he's going to be with this season under his belt when he finally gets a little bit more understanding. I mean, this time last year, Jamar Chase was talking about how he was struggling to catch the ball. So imagine now he's not struggling to catch the ball, how good he is going to be this year. I was tempted to put him higher, but Justin Jefferson, Deebo Samuel, Davante Adams and Cooper Kupp are just a little bit better at the moment. But this is his year to show that he can be talked about as an elite wide receiver, and he's going to score a ton of points. He didn't get the most amount of catches, but as I said, one catch, he can go for a touchdown just with that one. So he's going to score you a lot of points, and he's a real deep threat. So watch out for Jamar Chase and draft him in the first couple of rounds if you can. Or I reckon round 2 or 3. I think he's a good place to draft him. Moving on to the tight ends, and I don't know how you can start off any tight end list without Travis Kelce. He has been the best tight end in the NFL over the last 5 years, and maybe decade as well, if you're kind of discounting Rob Gronkowski. Gronkowski has, I think maybe the best tight end ever, but Travis Kelce's not far off. He has been brilliant for the Chiefs. He's been Mahomes' safety blanket, and without Kelce, maybe he wouldn't have an MVP, or well, Mahomes wouldn't have an MVP or a Super Bowl win. And he's just the ultimate tight end, the guy that you want on your team. He's brilliant. Last year, he was overtaken a little bit by Mark Andrews, but I've got to say, you can't put Mark Andrews ahead of Travis Kelce when Lamar Jackson's the Ravens quarterback, and he just runs the ball most of the time. So Patrick Mahomes, throwing the ball to this guy, how could you not want that? And let alone, he's going to have more targets this year, I think, because Tyreek Hill has gone to the Dolphins. And this guy is definitely the number one. It was kind of split between Tyreek Hill and Travis Kelce, but now he's by himself. I think he's certainly going to get the majority of the targets, catches, yards. And I think over the last 5 seasons, he has more yards than any other receiver. Tight ends, wide receivers combined. He's very consistent. And that's what you want in fantasy. If you ask me, I would rather have a player that gets you 15 points every single week than 1 week getting you 20, 1 week getting you 10, because you got to have some reliability there. And Travis Kelce's your guy. He can sometimes get up to like 30 points as well, but it's like a minimum of 15, 16, and that is fantastic. So as I already mentioned, Mark Andrews beat Travis Kelce in terms of points last year by actually quite a long way, and he had a really impressive season, considering Lamar Jackson is not one to really pass the ball very often. Lamar Jackson is a definitely run-first, pass-second guy, but Mark Andrews is always his first option when he's passing, because, as I said, tight end is the safety blanket, and Patrick Mahomes has the best one in Travis Kelce, but Mark Andrews isn't that far off, and Lamar Jackson will always look to this guy, because when you're not the best quarterback, you look to your safety blanket. And Mark Andrews last year had over 100 catches, and he's probably going to have something similar again this year, as Lamar Jackson probably tries to throw it a little bit more this year. Mark Andrews, I think, is going to go around in the second round. So definitely snap him up if you can, but because it's very hard to find a top level tight end, and there's only maybe 4 in the NFL. You'll see who I have 5th though. He definitely could make the cut as elite shortly. So, Darren Waller, my 3rd tight end. I think that he wasn't quite as good last year as maybe you'd expect, but he was the only receiver that Derek Carr had, and he did get injured a little bit as well. But even when since he's the only receiver Derek Carr had, he was double, triple covered. He was at least double covered on basically every play. And that is going to be completely the other way around this year, because Davante Adams is going to garner a lot more of that attention as he joins the Raiders. So I think Darren Waller is going to get a lot more open, get a lot more catches, and a lot more yards as well. Derek Carr is going to throw the ball an awful lot with his new head coach. He was Patriots offensive coordinator last. I can't remember his name in this moment, but he was brilliant. And if you want a good tight end that's going to be around 4 or 5 instead of the 1 and 2 that Mark Andrews and Kelce is going to be, Darren Waller's your guy. He's a fantastic tight end, and I think he's going to get better and better, especially as there's other threats at the Raiders now as well. And also, I think he's going to stay healthy again this year, which bodes well for how many fantasy points he's going to get you. Next up, I've got George Kittle. He's a brilliant tight end, and if he's healthy, which he's found it hard to do, he gets you tons and tons of points. But that was with Jimmy Garoppolo at quarterback. I don't have the same kind of faith in Trey Lance though, because Trey Lance he really struggled to get 50% completion percentage, and in the end, I felt like Kyle Shanahan, the head coach, was calling plays that would just focus on increasing Trey Lance's completion percentage and confidence, whereas that's not what you want. You want to call plays that you know that your guy is gonna complete to the best of their ability, and you don't really get that with Trey Lance. They're all running plays, and George Kittle is an excellent blocking tight end, but that's kind of where you're going to pick up injuries, and that doesn't score you fantasy points, and that is what we're interested in today's video. So I think George Kittle, he's a good one to draft. He is an elite tight end like the 3 other guys ahead of him, but he's not going to get the kind of catches that the other 3 are, and that's why I've got him down at number 4 to draft this year. I would be very wary unless Jimmy Garoppolo is somehow the quarterback, and I think fingers crossed if you own George Kittle or Deebo Samuel as well, that you want Jimmy Garoppolo as the 49ers quarterback next season. Now, there's a little bit of a drop-off between these top 4 guys and the next guy up, which is Kyle Pitts. Kyle Pitts was a rookie last year. He didn't score an awful lot of fantasy points, but week 5 onwards, he did start to get into his flow a little bit and start to make more plays for the Falcons. Calvin Ridley stopped playing for the Falcons for personal reasons at the time. I think also he's had trouble with sports betting as well. And so I think with that, it really helped Kyle Pitts to get a bit more attention from Matt Ryan, and he showed that he has a lot of potential. He's a great pass catcher, not a great blocker, but that's great for us fantasy owners. And I think when those tight ends start flying off the board and you're stuck and George Kittle's just gone and you're like, who do I draft next? Definitely Kyle Pitts. He's going to get a lot of attention from Marcus Mariota. And whilst Marcus Mariota is a bit more of a runner than Matt Ryan, well, a lot more of a runner than Matt Ryan was, I still think that Kyle Pitts is going to get a lot of attention in the passing game. And, I mean, last year he only got 1 touchdown in week 5 against the Jets. There's no doubt in my mind that is going to increase, unless in the preseason he tears his ACL or something to keep him out. But your tight end catching 1 touchdown, that's quite rare. And he's definitely going to improve on that this year. And moving on to defenses, this is a little bit of a tricky one because I find that in playing fantasy each year, it's quite difficult to know who's going to get you the most points. I mean, last year the Cowboys, they had a decent defense, but it wasn't actually very good. but they got interceptions, fumbles, and returned them for touchdowns, and they got a lot of fantasy points from that. So it's kind of now whether you think who's going to get you the turnovers, and I think that the Bills are probably going to be the best. But it does change every year, and it's hard to predict. So I think the Bills, they have a fantastic defense. They added Von Miller this offseason, and I think they are the best defense in the NFL. They're so deep at every position, and man, they are hard to get through. I think that the only worry with drafting the Bills defense in your fantasy team is that their offense is so good, the defense might not be playing 100%. Where, like, for example, a team with a bad offense would. Like, I'll spoil one already, but the 49ers, if they have Trey Lance at quarterback and their offense is struggling, the defense will have to play at a really high level to keep them in games. And the Bills might not have to do that because they have Josh Allen and Stephon Diggs and a great offense. So I think that the Bills, they're a great one to draft, but that's the only worry with it. They do have an excellent defensive head coach in Sean McDermott as well. So there's no doubt in my mind they'll be on someone's fantasy team. It just depends on whose. And in the first few weeks of the season last year, they were scoring 20 points or so. And it's just whether they can continue that for the whole season, I think. Number 2, I'm going to go with the Packers. They have a very deep squad. They have Jair Alexander, a fantastic corner who's going to get you your interceptions. And they draft their first round draft pick pretty much every year is a defensive player. So it is actually very deep and very strong unit. And that's actually the unit that I think is going to carry the Packers this year. I think the Packers offense, despite having Aaron Rodgers, that he's won back-to-back MVPs recently. He's won 4 MVPs all time. He's won a Super Bowl. He's the highest paid player in the NFL. And I think he's going to have a hard year. And the Packers are going to be the unit. The Packers defense is going to be the unit that carries the Packers to the playoffs, I think. And they're also in quite a weak division. So I think that they have a high potential to get lots of turnovers and lots of touchdowns in response to those turnovers. And the Saints, they have the best secondary in the NFL. They added Tyrann Mathieu, Marcus May. Despite losing Marcus Williams, they have Marshawn Lattimore and CJ Gardner-Johnson. And oh man, that secondary is unbelievable. There's not many teams that's going to be passing on them. We have also got Dennis Allen, defensive head coach, and we played brilliantly last year. And I think that the Saints, wow, you've noticed, I've been saying so they're my team. I think they're going to have a really strong year defensively, and there's no doubt they're going to be top 5 defense. Maybe they'll find it harder in terms of point scoring, but the Saints defense and the Saints have always prided themselves on going after turnovers, and with the team that they have, with Demario Davis at linebacker as well, Cam Jordan defensive end, they're going to be tough to get past, and they will get their turnovers. So, I mean, they're going to be my draft pick for defense, and I'm going to have them on my team because I love the Saints, and I really believe that they're going to be a top defense. Moving on to the Dolphins, they have an excellent secondary as well. Not as good as the Saints, but they have Byron Jones at corner, Xavier Howard at corner. They have great depth all round. Their defensive line is strong as well, and they're a tough team to play against. They'll also have a quarterback that's going to struggle, I think. I don't quite trust Tua to move the ball down the field and score lots of points. So the Dolphins defense is going to have to be one of going to have to carry that team in certain games. And Mike McDaniels, he's an offensive head coach, but it's his first year. And I think he's going to have some real support from that defense if they're going to succeed. And I believe that they can do it because they're a really good roster and a really good unit. Moving on to the 49ers. As I said earlier, they have an offense that is really going to struggle this year. They have one of the best linebackers in the league, arguably the best in Fred Warner. Well, argued a lot by my friends that support the 49ers. And also they have Nick Bosa as well, who could potentially have, he's one of those top 5 defensive ends as well. TJ Watt tops it, but the Bosa brothers are also in that top 5. And, their defense is going to be playing at the highest possible level, as their offense is going to struggle. I don't have a lot of faith in Trey Lance. Kyle Shanahan could do an absolute madness and make that offense really tick, but I think it's going to struggle definitely towards the start of the season, those first 8 games. So the 49ers, they're a good sleeper pick, I think, for the defense. There are other picks out there for defense, but, it's just something that you might have to take a look at and have a think. I'm just going to talk briefly about kickers because it's actually very difficult to predict what kickers are doing well. You could go with the name like Justin Tucker, Evan McPherson, who are very reliable. But they're never the reliable ones that are around every year aren't always the highest scorers. So you might want to look at the waiver wire, and that's how I do it. I wait until the last round of the draft to pick my kicker, unless like Justin Tucker's there in like round 14 or something. But I think that that's kind of the way to go, is the waiver wire. Judge what kicker's doing well. If your kicker has a bye, get the next best guy. Daniel, I end up with the same kicker in every league as well, because I just pick up the hot hand. And often the hot hand isn't necessarily on a team because maybe they're not the name like Justin Tucker and Evan McPherson. Okay, so that's my suggestion with a kicker. And that kind of brings us an end to our fantasy extravaganza. Guys, pick up the players that I've talked about if you can, because they are going to have big seasons unless they get injured. I would love to play fantasy with you as well. So if you want to watch, definitely go down into the description. There's a link to go to join a fantasy league. That's my league as well. So definitely get in there because I want to play against you guys. And I'm really excited. To have a little bit more interaction with you guys, as well as these live streams as well. CatFat has dropped in earlier and said hello. Thank you, CatFat. Great to have you. And thank you so much for joining. Sorry I didn't see your message earlier. But yeah, I'll have to love you and leave you. Make sure you stop by on Thursday because I got a friend coming over and I think we're going to do a bit of Madden. So you can watch us have a right go at each other on Madden 21. I think is it 22? Madden 22. There's also, if you're interested in Madden, check out my Jaguars Journey career mode or franchise mode that I did over the last few months. Check that out. Also, be back Thursday. And thank you guys so much for watching. Join me in my fantasy leagues and head to wallofnfl.com on Facebook, or Wall of NFL on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and TikTok as well. And this Thursday and most Sundays as well. Maybe not next Sunday because it's my birthday on the Monday. So maybe I'll be taking a break. But we'll see you then. Thank you so much for watching.